Welcome, everybody. This room is now having the session on contesting AI and data practices. If you want to stay here, please do take a seat. Slowly finish up your conversations. For everyone who's still outside and can hear me, please come in now. Thank you. All right. And then we can start the session, and I hand over the mic.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us today. In this session, we're going to speak about contesting AI and data practices. So we want to speak about very practical and effective approaches to responsible data practices. What can we do to do this? And looking at platforms like PrivacyCamp or CPDP, we see these are platforms that are not only driving the discourse on civil rights in the digital age, they create the necessary awareness, present concepts, and connect people. This year's topics, Act Now, is something that really resonates with what we are doing here and the speakers that we have here today. Practically, to act, to do ethics, as Willy would say, or to implement something that would work. We are here today with three speakers, with Iris Muis from the Utrecht Data School, who's a data ethicist and runs a team that implements actual data practices. Willy Tadema, who's the chief data and AI ethicist in the Ministry for the Interior and Kingdom Relations in the Netherlands. And Joost Gerritsen, who's a privacy and AI lawyer in the Netherlands and has his own law firm. My name is Mirko Tobias Schäfer, and I'll be the moderator and trying to connect the talks to each other and connect to the audience for discussion and questions. The session is built in a way that we will have 3 lightning talks by each of our speakers, where they present how they help organizations to tackle issues around responsible data and AI practices, and what works and what is an obstacle they see in their day-to-day practice. We will then have a discussion about that and include you, the audience, as much as possible. We don't have any cups to give away or stickers to share with you, so I hope that the intrinsic motivation will be sufficient to participate in this panel. So without further ado, I give the floor to Iris Muis, who's going to speak from her perspective.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I have a technical question. Could we have our slides up on the screen, perhaps? Great. Thank you so much. So let me start off first. My name is Iris Muis. I work at Utrecht University in the field of data ethics. We work at Utrecht Data School, Mirko and I. Some of our colleagues are also present here today. And what we do is we research the impact of technology on society. We do it across different domains, but our main focus area is governmental organizations in the Netherlands. How we work is that we do a lot of publicly engaged research and teaching. So that means that we work in the field, we develop instruments that can be used by the sector and that we in turn can use to harvest research data. First, a little bit about my background. I studied law, international relations, and then I worked at a municipality, City of Amsterdam. I worked at an NGO in digital education for children, and now I'm working at Utrecht Data School as lead operations. Okay, so I'm delving right into the practical implementation of data ethics. That's of course the focus of this panel. We will share with you lots of practices from the Dutch context specifically. And first I would like to share with you 2 very practical instruments that we as Utrecht University have developed and that have been used for the past 6-7 years extensively by the governmental sector. So a few of them are already on the screen, actually. I will dive into 2 of those, which is the one on the left, the Fundamental Rights and Algorithms Impact Assessment, and the one on the top right corner, the data ethics decision aids, which are dialogical tools for project teams of data projects to discuss ethics, deliberate on ethical dilemmas, make decisions, and document those decisions. Okay, so first of all, the fundamental rights and algorithms impact assessment, which can, by the way, be seen here. So you can take a look for yourself. It's an instrument aimed at government organizations that want to use data or digital technology, for instance, algorithms to predict social benefit fraud, to monitor safety, all kinds of algorithms. And we really want to make sure that no human rights or fundamental rights are breached. So we've been asked by the Ministry for the Interior to develop this impact assessment. Let me quickly go through the different steps. Of course, you can take a look at the instrument yourself, but just to get an idea, the first step is to answer the why question. So why do we need this algorithm? What kind of societal issue is this algorithm going to solve? Does it have a legal ground? Is it even allowed to use this kind of algorithm for this kind of problem? Then the second block is involving technology. So what kind of technology are we going to use? Is it a very complex algorithm? Does it involve training data? What kind of input data are we feeding the algorithm? The third question is context. So how is it implemented? Because a very technically sound algorithm can still cause harmful effects if it's implemented in the wrong ways or in a certain vulnerable context. So it's about, you know, what citizens are affected. Are those vulnerable groups? Is there a potential for discrimination or other harmful effects? And the fourth and final part of the fundamental rights and algorithms impact assessment surrounds fundamental rights. So it's really about the question, you know, what fundamental rights can be impacted by this algorithm, both negatively and positively, and do the benefits of this algorithm weigh up to the potential harms on human rights it can cause. So it really allows for, you know, teams, data teams, interdisciplinary teams to make these kinds of decisions. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one I would like to introduce is the data ethics decision aid, which has been around for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. It's also in use in Germany, Sweden, Greece, so it has more of a European use as well. And this is also meant for dialogue, facilitating dialogue in a project team. So imagine you know, someone with a technical background sitting at a table, the project lead sitting at the table, a legal expert or DPO having a place at the table and talking about ethical dilemmas surrounding data together, making decisions and documenting these decisions. And all of this leads to, you know, accountability, responsibility, enabling us as citizens, but also the fourth estate, the media, to ask questions and to be able to get answers. You know, why have you chosen to do or implement this technology in a certain way? So that's what we've been working with for the past 6 or 7 years. We've seen a lot about how data ethics works in practice. How organizations implement or try to implement data ethics. So I look forward to sharing some of these findings with you today and also to discuss these with my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris. Well, that was some perspective from academia, but you can see this was an do and research perspective, because we do not only think of concepts and drop them at the bottom of the ivory tower. We are actually out in the field and try to develop things that can be applied. And we always do so for collecting insights. So let's now turn to Joost Gerritsen, who will share his experience as a privacy and AI lawyer working with a wide range of companies, but also public entities.
Thank you, Mirko, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Joost Gerritsen from the firm Legal Beetle. Indeed, I'm a lawyer since 2010 now, specialized in privacy laws and solving legal issues surrounding emerging technologies. And in 2016, I started my own law firm. And 2016, of course, is the year when the GDPR was published. And my daily practice consists mostly of advisory work, but I also conduct research. And in that respect, I wrote several publications regarding artificial intelligence. I think you can see them on the screen. One is called Human Rights in the Robot Age, or Better Protected Against Biometric Technologies. And another one is called Tackling Deepfakes in the European Policy Space. I also co-founded the Dutch Association for AI Lawyers. That's something we and my other founder invented, that phrase, AI lawyers. And next to that, in addition, I maintain a newsletter. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, you can follow, you can get updates on pending cases before the Court of Justice of the EU. I was talking about the publications, and I think they all have one thing in common. I think every publication, and by the way, I write them with the Rathenau Institute most of the time. Almost each publication ends with the notion that technology puts public values under pressure. And we send those reports, those publications to, for instance, the Dutch government or the European Parliament and the Council of Europe. And we advise them on how to deal with that pressure and how to maintain the public values. So my point for now, for the couple next minutes, is the following. I think that implementing data practices that preserve public values should be something profitable. And I have a few ideas how that can be done. And yeah, Mirko already said it. I advise companies, and my focus will be on companies for the next minutes. But let's address the question first. What are companies? Because we all have ideas about it, but let's look at facts. Did you know, for instance, that in Europe, 98.9% are small companies? So those are companies who employ less than 50 people. And only 0.2% are large ones, and they have more than 250 people working for them. But then again, those large companies, they almost offer 50% of the economic value, so they are quite important to us. You can think of ASML, which is a Dutch semiconductor company, it's very well known, or a software company like SAP, also known as SAP, or Adyen, which is a Dutch payment services provider. Those are really big companies. And well, do they use artificial intelligence? Yes, they do. I think in 2019, our National Statistics Institute, and when I mean our, I mean the Dutch one, conducted research and discovered that more than half of the big companies use artificial intelligence. And in practice, that means they use machine learning or facial recognition or image recognition. And yeah, this is the background of companies. A lot of small ones, a few large ones, but who make the headlines in the international press when public values are infringed? Well, if you ask me, that's mostly the abbreviation known as GAFAM, or Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. And indeed, if you look at the top 10 of the biggest GDPR fines, 9 of them are concern GAFAM-related companies. In fact, only 3 of them, and those are Google, Facebook, and Amazon. So we have to keep in mind that if we talk about companies, those GAFAM companies are not a fair representation of the companies in Europe. However, all these companies, being from America or Europe, have one thing in common. They are for profit and sometimes with a mission to add a value for shareholders. So those are companies, and I use the phrase public values a few times. What are public values? Well, you can answer that question, I think, from different perspectives. I'm a lawyer, so I have a legal perspective. And when I think of public values, I think of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Enshrined in the Charter are various values translated into rights. We know privacy rights, which is basically a combination of data protection rights and respect for private and family rights, life. But there are, of course, a lot of other rights. Think of the right to free expression, or the right to be, not to be discriminated against, for instance. And all those rights, which I just told you about, they have one thing in common. They are not absolute, they are relative rights. So that means that you have to outweigh them against other rights. And they can be being overridden by other rights, such as rights maintained by companies. Companies also have rights. For instance, the right to have the freedom to conduct a business, the right to peaceful enjoyment of possessions, and overall there's an important interest, namely the economic well-being of a country. And all those rights, in certain circumstances, can outweigh privacy rights, for instance. In practice, this means that companies have to perform a balancing act with the rights and the interests of you, the citizens, people, and they have to balance them against their own rights. And it can be quite a hassle, but of course, thanks to instruments like data, which Iris just described, it can be done. But the thing is that we're talking about data practices, preserving public values, such as data. How can we make them attractive for those companies? Because yeah, it's an instrument, but companies, like I just said, they are for profit. So back to my point, those data practices have to be profitable somehow. And how can we make that an attractive option for them, for the companies? I think, of course, there are... I'm astonished by my own PowerPoint skills. Of course, there are two simple solutions if we talk about how to implement those data practices at companies. One is actually a message addressed to the supervisory authorities, enforce the law. So if you enforce them when they breach the GDPR, for instance, and you do it more often, for instance, then it can help establishing a more equal level playing field, so to speak. Another solution would be addressed to the Court of Justice. I think the Court of Justice should allow non-material damages, that you can claim non-material damages when the GDPR, for instance, is breached. Or the courts can also allow competitors to claim, to make claims against each other when the GDPR are breached. And maybe you think, is this not the case right now? No, if it comes to non-material damages, or a competitor cannot go to the court and saying, hey, my competitor is infringing the GDPR, dear judge, do something about it. Right now it's not possible, but in the near future it may change. Yeah, those are two, in my view, simple things, and maybe you heard them all before. So let's dive into the more interesting stuff. What can you do? Well, that depends. If you work at an NGO like EDRI, I think you have to start thinking about who are your enemies and who are your allies. So from my experience, only really a small portion of companies are highly dubious. For instance, TikTok or Clearview, they don't have our best interests in mind. You should focus on the majority, seek allies with them, because in my view, they are well willing. Oh, 2 minutes, I'm going to speed a little bit up. Yes, they make mistakes, the majority, like accidental data leaks, but they are not evil. And they are not faceless entities. Humans work there, like you and me, and they really want to do the right thing. So what can you do? You can befriend them, like data protection officers or other influential people for a bottom-up approach, convincing their directors that public value preserving practices are the way to go. So you want people within companies to challenge the higher-ups. Are we doing this ethically? But how can we make them, the people in charge, the directors, listen? Well, in my view, you should make public value preserving data practices a unique selling point, a USP. So companies love to be industry leaders, and NGOs should help them with that. And my idea is that you should, as an NGO, invite them to co-write a code of conduct. And maybe you would think, oh, code of conduct, self-regulatory, it won't help, it's too vague. No. In practice, code of conducts are well respected by the courts. If you are a company who adhere to such a code of conduct and you infringe the code, then the judge suspects that you act unlawful. So it's quite a serious instrument, and it's, I think, quite underrated. Such codes of conduct are encouraged by the GDPR and the AI Act, and I think they are a perfect opportunity to introduce ethical data practices. My final sentence, Mirko, because okay, now we have a code of conduct, writing together with, let's say, a bunch of companies. Now what? So here's my idea to put in the code of conduct at least one provision that says that companies only make their budget available to an AI product or AI service once they successfully completed certain data practices that preserve public values, for instance, data. In a company, it's all about money, and if the company if a project is not greenlit because it doesn't pass successfully the data assessment, yeah, then there's no budget available and we are protected from potentially harmful AI. I have a lot of more ideas, but I'm out of time, so I conclude with this.
Thank you so much. We'll pick your ideas up in the discussion, and we like the idea of connecting data mandatory likewise to codes of conduct. Now we turn to a perspective from the government sector. Willy, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think you introduced me as being a chief AI ethicist, but I have to
It's how you come across, so it's just the
not,
question of my respect.
Not yet, at least. So my name is Willy Tadema. I'm a data scientist and AI ethicist working for the Dutch Ministry of the Interior. My team is working with governments, a governmental organization trying to realize the potential of data and AI in a trustworthy way. So accountable, transparent, fair, safe and secure, and without infringing privacy if it's not necessary and disproportionately. So we are mainly working for central governments on a national level, like ministries and the tax authority and the judiciary. We provide numerous services. We assist governments in designing, building, testing, deploying and using AI, but we also conduct a lot of assessments. So fundamental rights impact assessments, for instance, bias assessments, pre-audit assessments. And we also, on a strategical level, advise organizations how to prepare for new legislation and policies like the AI Act or the National Algorithmic Register. So, but I think the main focus of our team is putting ethics into practice. So helping governments, helping them doing ethics. Right? What should they do? So when I started this job almost 5 years ago, things were like, we had a lot of trust in data and AI. It was almost like a holy grail. It was going to solve all our problems. Data science and AI was very much mystified, like in this picture. So governments were setting up data labs everywhere. They were recruiting data scientists. They were experimenting and prototyping. And also the data scientists, they were doing their work in isolation. And people were thinking, well, we better leave those data scientists alone. We give them the data and we give them the computing power, and then they can perform their magic. So, yeah, to be honest, of course, there were data protection impact assessments being done because that was mandatory under the GDPR. But on the whole, not a lot of attention was paid to the legal and ethical risks. And also, when you're, not a lot of attention was paid to the organizational and technical aspects of testing and deploying and using algorithms. And also data issues like data access, data quality, data representativeness. Well, that wasn't really a thing we talked a lot about. So the data scientist was doing his work, was optimizing for accuracy and not so much for fairness and transparency and also accountability. No, well, was not really paid a lot of attention to. And it's not, I don't mean to bash those organizations because I think in hindsight, it is what you could expect. It was a new technology, it was very much hyped, and of course our, the organizations had a really low maturity level when we look at AI and ethics. So you have to keep that in mind. But I have to be honest, sometimes it really scared me, what I was seeing. But then things started to change because we had a number of scandals in the Netherlands. We had, for instance, the judge ruling that the fraud, the welfare fraud detection system Siri was unlawfully. And of course, we had the child care benefit scandal. That was enormous. It was really awful. So that was marking the beginning of a lot of new policies being drafted and new instruments, new tools being developed for trustworthy AI. And of course, that is a really good thing. So where are we now? Okay, well, I think that, next sheet, I think a lot of governments now are hesitant, maybe reluctant to use AI. I see a lot of projects being stopped, prototypes not making it into production, and all this without sound reasoning, without good arguments. And that is a bad thing, because it means we are not learning. We are not learning from our failures. We are just wasting taxpayers' money. We are talking a lot more about ethics, and that's also a very good thing. But I think it's limited to ethical dilemmas. So it's limited to the question, should we be even building this algorithm? And once we have decided that we need an algorithm, the ethical discussions, they just stop. But we also have to talk about ethical decisions. How do we translate public values into design requirements, design decisions? We also are still focusing on the algorithm and not on the algorithmic system. Of course, it's true, a lot of bias can stem from the algorithm and also the data. But like we have seen in the child care benefit scandal, you can also do a lot of harm by using an algorithm in the wrong way. So, and as a consequence of zooming in on the algorithm, the responsibility for trustworthy AI is still put on the shoulders of the technical team. And this is also a really bad thing, because ethics is something, it's for the whole organization, not only for the engineers. So I think on the whole, what we are seeing is that, government organizations are overwhelmed. And they are very insecure. They need to take the lead. They need to prioritize. They need to chart a course, but they fail to do so. So they look at external parties for guidance. And that is a really bad thing, because ethics should be ingrained in the organization. It's not something that you can outsource. So what should we do to bridge the gap between theory and practice? Well, for one, we should stop placing the burden of moral decision on the engineering teams, on the technical teams. And we should, when we look at trustworthy AI, it's not only technical robust, but it's also legal, ethical, and organizational robust. So we should bring in the lawyers, the ethicists, the system engineers, but also psychologists, communication experts, many more people. And especially when we are looking at high-stake algorithms, we should have all stakeholders at the table right from the beginning. So also people representing those groups within society that are impacted by the algorithm. We should create a level playing field. So the information position of every stakeholder should be the same. And we should pay attention to language, develop a common language. Otherwise, we can't have a meaningful deliberation. But I think, well, my most important point would be if we need to adopt a learning approach. We need to bring the outside world in. We have to invest in people and teams. Ethics is not something that you can buy or outsource. Ethics needs to be in the DNA of your organization, meaning the people. And also ethics is knowing the right thing to do in every situation. That's not something that you can learn by reading a book or looking at a policy or at a regulation. Ethics is something that you should do, and you should practice it to get better at it. And ethics is not a one-size-fits-all. We do not want government organizations that run through checklists and tick all the boxes. We want government organizations that are guided by their values and that create and use algorithms accordingly so. So I think as a government, we should lead by example. We should adopt a learning approach, get the outside world in, and well, it's my hope that we can do this with you, with industry, with academia, and of course with the NGOs. So.
Thank you, Willy. Thank you. This was a great call to action. With an eye to the time,
Got a sheet for that?
Yes, come on, everybody. If it's also with an eye to the time, we don't want to keep the audience also from engaging with the experts here on the podium. So please feel free to raise a hand. There's a nice gentleman who is going to share a microphone. And there is already the first question.
Hello, thank you very much for the organization. I am a data scientist and also a master's student at KU Leuven in data science program. And in one of the courses, which is privacy and big data, we learned that we have a tool called Lindun, developed by KU Leuven. It is similar to DIDA, I think. At least I find it similar. Yeah, I think there will be some advantages and maybe some pros and cons of following one or the other tool framework for applying in practice. I am wondering whether there is a project or a work to merge this kind of frameworks in EU because we have one law, GDPR, which is the state of the art, I believe, in the world. Maybe we can come up with one framework. Maybe there can be other obstacles, I don't know, but it may be a good project to foster and help the data scientists in this way. What do you think about this?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much. There's a plethora of frameworks, deliberation methods. Only in the Netherlands alone, we have several. I mean, there's an NGO, Algorithm Watch, that collects all of these different manifestos and methods, and they are over 100 now. You can see them, that it's an endless list on their website. So I understand the confusion and where do you start? Which framework do you choose? It's very difficult, and I presented to you 2 frameworks we developed. Of course, I'm very biased, being the co-author of both of them. But I think the core point of all of these methods is an ethical deliberation, fostering an ethical deliberation between stakeholders of interdisciplinary background, and ingraining public values or organizational values, translating them into your technology design. So how you do that doesn't really matter. Which method you choose doesn't really matter. As long as you do it with stakeholders involved, an interdisciplinary team, I think that's very important to not just get blindsided or miss or have blind spots. And also to foster a shared responsibility to not just focus on, like Willy mentioned, the technical people as being responsible for data ethics, or maybe the project leader, but to really share this responsibility within the organization. And also, what we encounter a lot, we've been to over 100 institutions in the Netherlands to conduct or lead these kinds of ethical deliberations. Every organization has different values. So especially in the case of governmental organizations, for instance, like cities or municipalities, every 4 years the politicians change. So they may have in one term a very liberal head of the government, and they choose liberal algorithms. But then there's elections, maybe a democratic or left-wing party comes to power, and you should really review all of these data practices again to make sure they're still in line with the values. So whichever method you choose, the translation of these public values is very important. And of course, there is some harmonization. Of course, we have the data protection impact assessments. In the AI Act, some sort of human rights impact assessment is probably being installed. And it would be good to have one harmonized human rights impact assessment, but still it needs to leave some room for organizational values to be ingrained in that assessment.
Thank you, thank you. You said you're studying applied data science. Yes, so I'm managing the applied data science at Utrecht University, and your question is awfully familiar. I get that very often from the students. So I think what you will recognize very often is that these ethical questions are delegated to you. But I think that data scientists should recognize them and assign responsibility and give it back to the organization and take them on the table and say, it's not only the law that regulates this, as Iris just pointed out, it's also the values that might differ from one municipality to the other. And the data scientists shouldn't accept to be left alone with this.
Yeah, maybe I can add something to that, because I'm also a data scientist. So I totally understand the position that you are in. And you were saying, like, it's important to recognize the values. And for instance, when we are looking at equality and non-discrimination, of course, we want the algorithm to be fair, and we should talk about that. But in my experience, okay, so we are saying the algorithms should be fair. You are the data scientist. You check that. And it's not something that I was prepared for at university. So we were taught how to train models, but not how to translate fairness into a metric that we can optimize our models on. So I think this is also something that lacks in our training and education. So, and luckily we're seeing in the Netherlands that a lot of universities are adding this to their curriculum. So but I think that's also a very important point.
Yeah, me.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Javier Saez. I work for Fundación Secretariado Gitano. It's an NGO working against discrimination against Roma community in Spain. And I would like to ask to Mrs. Tadema if, or maybe the other colleagues, if you have experience on how to prevent bias on algorithms, racial bias. Because I remember a case in the Netherlands, was in Roermond, and when the predicting police finally criminalized Roma communities, Roma people. But we have also examples in Spain, and we are trying to work with authorities on how to prevent artificial intelligence or algorithms regarding racial discrimination. But the question is, do you have protocols or ideas about how to prevent that? And secondly, if you think it's interesting to get on board the communities that can be targeted or affected, racial or other minorities within these procedures. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, I think. For instance, yeah, when you are looking at discrimination, we don't have the awareness is there, but the best practices and the standards, they're not there. So we have to mature on that level. And it's a really difficult topic, because when you're talking about discrimination, depending on whether you are an engineer or an ethicist or a lawyer or just a worried citizen, you may assign that a very different meaning, discrimination. I think within law, hey, it's really good defined, what is discrimination and what is not.
I can add something.
Okay, well, maybe you could reflect on that. But it's really tough for a data scientist to say, I get asked quite a lot, hey, can you check whether this algorithm is discriminating? And it's a very, very difficult question. And it's not a question that I should answer. I can provide you with information about the bias in the data, the bias in the algorithm. Maybe we could even monitor the bias in the usage of the algorithm. But whether the algorithm is racist, whether it is discriminatory, is not something that a data scientist can decide, and it's something that we should do, I think, together. And we definitely need to develop best practices and standards, and I don't think they are here yet. So this is a topic that we really want to work together with academia and NGOs.
Yeah, no, for me, it's not easy at all, or not black and white, as you suggested. No, I think...
That's
no?
not my suggestion.
Oh, sorry.
No. It's
No, can you repeat?
Oh, well, I think like whether people ask me whether the algorithm is discriminatory, but I think when you look at non-discrimination law, it is contextual. It is depending on the circumstance.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well,
whether
then,
it is
yeah.
discriminatory. So it's not something that you can measure, or not something that you can automate. So it's really important to be aware of that. So you can't defer that decision, that assessment, to a technical person.
Yeah, but yeah, then I totally agree with you. Sorry, I just misunderstood. No, I think that the non-discrimination law is probably the hardest legal field to be active in. So last year I was invited to write an advice paper, small paper, to the Dutch Parliament about non-discrimination in an AI context. And boy, I almost fell off my chair. I mean, there's not only a lot of case law, but the case law is also about non-AI situations, but you have to somehow apply that to a modern situation. And what I also think what's really hard is that when we talk to each other and what someone says, I am discriminated, most of the time you think, yeah, that's illegal, that shouldn't be done. But from a legal perspective, discrimination, like I said in my opening speech, it's a relative right. So yes, some forms of discrimination are always forbidden, but there are also forms that can be justified. And that makes it really difficult that sometimes you feel, oh, this shouldn't be done, this is discriminatory, we should get rid of it. But if you ask a judge, the judge will say, yeah, well, okay, but in this situation, it can be done. So yeah, part of the advice paper, I dove in the, also in the academic work. Maybe you know the name Sandra Wachter. She's active, I think, at Oxford University. She did a lot of academic papers. And if I understand her correctly, she says, yeah, well, you cannot eradicate bias in an algorithm. It simply cannot be done. She has several arguments for that. But that message we try to convey to the Dutch Parliament as well, because the Parliament said, I think it was even our Prime Minister, he said, I want zero discrimination in our algorithms. I don't want any of it. But we had to say to him, sorry, Mr. Rutte, yeah, of course, not literally, but we said, that's impossible, thanks to Sandra Wachter, we know this, and for other reasons. So our question to the politicians were, what level of discrimination are you willing to accept? And that's a really, not a nice discussion to have, but I think a really important discussion, because from my legal perspective, it's really hard to prevent harmful AI. And yeah, it's like I said, it's difficult, most difficult legal field that I know of.
If I may, yeah, please go ahead.
So Joost is touching on an interesting point, which is the role of politicians. Which is something I would like to add something on. So in the Netherlands, you see a very clear shift, where at first politicians were like, okay, I'm not a technical person, I don't know anything about technology, so please leave the decisions regarding technology to the data scientists. We don't want to do anything. We don't even have a standpoint on technology. So this has really changed also due to the scandal Willy mentioned earlier. It has really awoken politicians to form a standpoint, political standpoint on the use of technology and data ethics. But the way they are getting involved is sometimes not very productive. Because they might lack the knowledge to provide adequate control over technology. And that's also where education and training comes in, again, to provide these politicians with the right information to adequately control and steer technological developments within their organization. So that's also a development we see, and we see getting stronger. So I highly suggest stimulating your local politician even to get involved in forming a standpoint on digital technology.
Thank you. There was another question there.
Hi, I'm Judith, and I'm conducting an action research on menstruation tracking and the role of technologies. And so I'm interviewing a lot of people who use apps, for instance, to track their menstruation. And I'm also looking with them how if the apps don't exactly work like they want them to work, how they can contact the companies behind these apps and tell them, hey, can you change this maybe? For instance, one person that I interviewed keeps receiving this pop-up where it says, do you want to conceive? And she really doesn't, and she has very sensitive reasons why she doesn't. So she really would like that this this pop-up to disappear, which is so I have a really practical question. How can we empower users to successfully have some sort of meaningful contact with companies? Because now we together sent an email to this company and we got an automatic reply, which was like, we're working on our services right now. Please rate us on the app, so that's not very helpful for users. And so that's my question. How can we empower users to do this?
Joost, can you say something from the consumer perspective?
Yeah, the thing is that this topic is already dealt with by the GDPR if it comes to data protection, data protection and processing activities. So yeah, you probably heard of the data subject and his or her rights. So from my perspective, I would say, this is not a problem at all. The law is already there. But yeah, I know as well, also from a personal experience, I sued T-Mobile because they used my location data or cell phone data to build apps, analytical apps. And I think, okay, sure, but they did it with the government and didn't tell anyone. I just learned it from the newspaper. So I was a bit, excited in the wrong way. I emailed them, and then indeed I recognized the story. At first, I had no reaction as well. And then, okay, I'm going to tell them I'm a lawyer, and then yes, I get a response. And it takes a lot of time. So even if you can find a contact person, it takes a lot of time. I actually took them to court because my...
But she cannot take them to court, can she?
Yeah, you can. If you are the data subject yourself, you can. And of course, you have NGOs specialized in class actions. So they can gather all those complaints. And you can go to the court for several reasons, but you have to think about the costs involved. It's very costly. And also the duration of it. It took me almost 2 years, and I know my way around the court. So, and then I thought, if it's quite difficult for me, how is it for people who didn't study law or who are not a lawyer? So yes, the GDPR helps. Also, the GDPR says something about EU representatives. So if the app is built by an American or Chinese company or whatever, they should have someone in Europe which you can contact. And last but not least, the AI Act, because the AI Act is coming. The first act in the world that regulates technology, also on the level of the programmers. The programmers have to think about a lot of stuff when they are making AI in the near future. Just like you are building a product, now you're making AI. And the AI Act also has provisions on you should have a contact person available, etc. Yeah, so I think I don't have a really good answer to the question other than yes, you have rights, and unfortunately, they are really hard to enforce. But it is possible.
Okay. There's a next question, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Fran. I work in applied machine learning in cybersecurity. I would like to start my question with an anecdote. So on an occasion, I got passed down a regulatory form from one of our clients in the financial sector about they had to report all the machine learning models in their environment. So we had to provide some information on that. I was kind of suggested to just, for any complicated stuff, to just say down it's proprietary, so it's easier. But I found the regulatory form actually quite well written. It covered most of the best practices. As someone who does his work well, I could basically give a decent answer on most questions without having to delve into actual proprietary stuff. So in the end, I did, and the feedback I got was mostly about I didn't answer some questions, and I felt like the answers I did provide were not really evaluated, and they kind of focused on how if it's more filled out completely rather than what I actually answered. So my question is, even if we do our best about being open about our practices, do everything right, what is the capacity of some regulatory framework to actually evaluate and absorb the information we provide about our work?
And with regulatory framework, you mean something like the fundamental rights algorithm impact assessment, or any of the other 160 on the algorithm watch list?
I can answer on that. I think you make a very valid point, because all of these frameworks, whichever you choose, are self-regulation, basically. So there is no capacity to, have someone check if the answers are correct. And with ethics, it's a very new field, so correct is still under debate with what is correct and what isn't. So I think that's where oversight and inspection really comes in. That's the stage in which regulation or authorities, inspection authorities, should really step in and in their respective domains. You have so many inspection authorities in the Netherlands, all overseeing their field. They have a lot of domain expertise. They've built this expertise and knowledge for over decades. They should really also oversee AI and the use of algorithms and technology within their domains. They should be the ones qualitatively checking what companies and other organizations are doing, not just if they have filled out the form completely, but really look at the contents. What is happening in our domain? Is that happening in the right way? Does it harm human rights or fundamental rights? And what we're seeing in the Netherlands right now, I have no experience in other countries when it comes to inspection authorities, but we see that those authorities are stepping up and taking their responsibility, trying to keep oversight on AI. You have a couple of frameworks which they are using already, but it is difficult for them, especially in domains, in domains such as the telecom industry. They are very technology heavy already. So they have a lot of capacities to do these kinds of checks. But in other domains, like food safety, for instance, the people working at such an authority don't have any experience with, auditing AI systems. So that's really something that should be built up and should be formalized, that mandate.
But there's another point to it, and if I understood Joost correctly here, the GDPR really encourages organizations to develop their own maturity, to develop their own codes of conduct and adhere to them. So this is something that I feel across the board of our experts here today, that they really call for the development of a mature approach to artificial intelligence and data practices, and to develop that within any organization. And that does not have to be prescribed necessarily in detail by law. It is something that has to be embedded much more in detail into the practice in the respective organizations. So my questions to the panel would be, what is the next step in achieving that? Because everything you presented, there are good ideas, there are best practices we can point to. There is a legal framework that seems to be really helpful and encouraging, but what is the next step to actually make responsible data practice and AI possible?
Shall I start? Of course, I work at a university, so I'm very biased in saying that education obviously plays a big part. Not only educating students, for instance, data science students, but also professionals working in the field right now, educating politicians, involving NGOs also in this. And really stimulating and encouraging that democratic control and deliberation. I think that's very important, and I'm sure you have a lot to add to this.
Well, I think, yeah, I agree. For me, the best thing to do now is to, especially when we are looking at high-stake algorithms, we should develop an inclusive, participatory, accountable, democratic approach to designing and building those algorithms. And well, we've done a pilot with the province of Friesland and with Roberto Sicari, trying to do the first steps. And it's really hard, it's really difficult, and there aren't a lot of examples. So I would really, love you to help us doing this, and well, yeah, proceed on that way. It's really important.
Okay, you clearly make a point here for the civil society, so media,
Exactly,
advocacy,
yeah.
and NGOs and educational institutions stepping in and contributing.
I've talked also to companies about this, and they were saying, "Oh, it's way too expensive, and it costs way too much time." And I understand from
Make it
company
profitable.
point, yes, but I think for us as a government, like I already said, we should set an example. And when we look at the child care benefit scandal, well, I do think that well, those costs and the harm that is done that we can't undo, they are much, much larger, so it's well worth the investment.
Yeah, if you ask me what can we do, let me start with a bias I have. My bias is that NGOs are a bit too much reactive. So if there's an act published or ideas of an act, you have all the NGOs reacting, "Oh, that's stupid," or "That's hindering fundamental rights." And I think probably they are right. But the problem with that approach is that you do not set the tone. And I think if you start a discussion or open up a debate, it's really important to set the tone. And how do you do that? Just be the first party to draft the act. You can do that. You can do that together with parliamentarians, or if it comes to my idea of the code of conduct, you do it together with the businesses. But if you want to have influence, you start with the draft on your own, and you go to the companies, "Hey, we already made this. Also, it will save you time and thus costs, and we can make you an industry leader. Come join us." However, this is my bias, and if you think, Joost, what are you saying? NGOs are not proactive. Feel free to challenge me.
So there's the question right there. I don't know whether that responds to that, but please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Leva. Thank you so much. I come from an active NGO. But I had a question in connection to the scandals you mentioned happened in the Netherlands, and also to the fact that it's impossible by input data to fix the algorithms to make sure that they're non-discriminatory. So in your opinion, what's the right recourse, or is there an effective recourse system that can be put in place for people who are affected, discriminated by the algorithms and systems?
So great question. I mean, it's I try to connect it to a few things that were already said. For instance, the case in Roermond, the gentleman mentioned, where the police started to non-discriminatorily scan all cars approaching a certain shopping mall. It was Amnesty International that really did the investigation and put it onto the agenda of the public discourse. That was really helpful. In the case of the Dutch child benefit scandal, I would like to point out, we always look at the technology here. But in that particular case, it wasn't artificial intelligence. It was probably a regression analysis that was carried out. There was no machine learning involved. But what we can learn from the case is that the context also matters. In that particular case, it was usually the political pressure that stopped people working on the cases to voice their concerns about the effectiveness of the rule-based algorithm, big word here, but that was applied. So I think to answer your question a bit, that all-encompassing approach should consider both technology and the social context. And the frameworks that we've seen today try to implement exactly that, to look at the developer's context of any digital system, whether it is a machine learning trained algorithm, or whether it is just a form of data analysis or a decision tree or whatsoever, and to look in particular in the use context. How is it used? How do you care about appeal processes? How do you deal with errors that are quite apparent? And that is something that was missing in the child benefit scandal affair, that there was no appeal process. There was no way to report the errors and have a response to that. So that would be my part on it, but maybe you want to add something from...
Yeah, I think I'm not an expert on the childcare benefit scandal, but I think, yes, the algorithm, it was faulty, it was discriminatory, but even if it hadn't been, the harm done would have been, also huge. Because when we look at how the predictions were being used and the interventions that were done, and those, and we could have said people were being flagged as potential fraudsters and their benefits were stopped. We could have said, okay, this is a person who forgot to file a form or put signature on a form. We can call them and we can tell them to correct their error. No, we didn't do that. We stopped their benefits. And also the predictions of the algorithm, they were being shared with other government agencies, and they were being reused in a completely different context, and new decisions being made upon those predictions. So, as I said before, we really need to look at the systemic level if we want to control these harms being done by AI. It's not enough to look at the algorithm.
And to add on that, what we've seen over the past 10 years in the Netherlands is that any change has been really driven by two things. On the one hand, the policy pressure coming from Brussels. So many municipalities started structurally thinking about the practices when the GDPR was approaching. That was the moment they really stepped up their game. And the other thing was errors that were reported in the media. So looking at the digital society, we really need a fourth estate that is tech savvy. We need a really good tech journalism that is capable in investigating this kind of our society and report on it in an effective and appropriate way. And I think we're lucky in the Netherlands that we have really some excellent tech journalists there and a vested interest of a public reading such coverage. And as for NGOs, so we've seen quite some shifts over the past 5 years. I mean, prior to this meeting, we discussed what has happened in those 5 years. And one thing is that we see NGOs also changing, that they start Amnesty International, for instance, concerning itself actively with issues of artificial intelligence and human rights. To what extent is that breaching? This is something that can really, I think, from the perspective of our position in academia, really help building a mature digital society where we have different stakeholders, a fourth estate that is tech savvy and able to ask the needed and hard questions about how technology is used, is able to investigate that even on a local level. Don't underestimate the local aspect. So in the Netherlands, we see algorithms really deployed on a local level, like social benefit fraud detection algorithms that are used by smaller municipalities and are developed by small and medium companies locally, not the big companies that we see there. So local journalism is here important as well to ask questions about that. And then, most importantly, I think the last mile after trained bureaucrats, people in our government sector, a legal sector that is robust. We need the last mile of stakeholders, the local electives, we would say. That's something that Iris tries to approach in her work in training elected people in municipalities. And that is something I believe would build a robust and mature digital society that can deal with these challenges. There's another question. So.
Yes, thank you. I work for a citizen engagement platform. And so most of our clients are from the public sector, but we also have private orgs, and we do use AI to summarize, categorize, and give insights about all the consultations that we organize for the clients. And as you say, it's extremely difficult to say whether, especially also because we use external services to do that, to say whether or not the algorithm is discriminatory and somehow it's also we as a tech subcontractor play a role into what tech we use and how transparent we are with the clients and the users. And so one way we kind of do for now, it's to also show on the platforms which decisions have been made or categorized or summarized by an AI service, so that at least the person knows that he needs to pay attention to potential bias or something else, and react to that. But in general, my question is then, what level of transparency and maybe traceability, and especially in the public sector, can citizen users or clients expect or should have to counter these potential bias and have a way to react? And so, yeah, what's the expected level of transparency? Is there something already in place for determining this? Or is it like on a per situation basis or something? Well, I would like to have your opinion on this.
Thank you. Excellent question. I think we had a letter by a Secretary of State demanding transparency unless otherwise. I start with our lawyer here. What can citizens expect in terms of transparency?
Well, I know there are a lot of methods around, and I don't know anything about it. Maybe you'll be next to me, but oh, I see 5 minutes. No, transparency is an important topic. Why? Because without it, you wouldn't know, for instance, whether or not you are discriminated if you have no idea how the algorithm works. So to a certain extent, transparency is needed. In the upcoming AI Act, that's totally understood, and the legislator has some provisions about that. However, legislator also puts a lot of references to, are you aware of something called ISO norms? So those are technical norms about how you should, in this case, provide transparency. And you see that the legislator, I think, it's a person like me. Once it gets too technical and too detailed, it says, well, go look at the delegated acts. So there will be, so you have the AI Act, but in the future we'll have a lot of surrounding delegated acts and ISO norms as well. And my expectation is that as part of those norms, you would know as an AI provider to what level of transparency you have to maintain. But so my answer is only yes, this is a known problem, and no, we do not know yet, we lawyers do not know yet the exact details on how transparent you have to be. Sorry.
I don't really have a better answer.
Oh, sorry.
I think, like with a lot of words, transparency is a word that we use quite often, but what it really means, that's very difficult. And when you start thinking about it, and when we are talking about transparent algorithms, you can think about, okay, the process should be transparent and accountable, and or you could say, well, the model and the behavior of the model needs to be transparent because, well, when we look at non-discriminatory legislation, we need to know how the model behaves and differences between demographic groups. And of course, when we are using the model for individual predictions and decisions, well, citizens, they want to contest those decisions and need transparency. So those are very different kinds of transparency, I think. So yeah, I don't have a good answer either. And I do think that, well, yeah, we need to dive into this. And I also think that the standards are really important, but that we should not leave that to a small group of, of people.
Lawyers.
No, well, not only lawyers, it's also people from industry. Actually, there has been some criticism on the development of the standards because it's not really a democratic process. So there should be more involvement, I guess, from government, from administrators, and from NGOs.
You have a minute.
There's just one small thing I wanted to add regarding transparency. Since the 1st of this month, in the Netherlands, there's a national algorithm register in which all government organizations are asked to disclose the algorithms they use, which they have done. I think you can check it later, but I think there are over 200 on there now, which really means a huge step for public transparency. Everyone can just go on there and see what kind of algorithms are used, what their purpose is. So I'm very curious to see how that development will go in the future and if other countries will adopt the same practices. Thank you.
Well, we are at the end of this panel. Thank you all very much for being here and for the questions and the fruitful discussion we had. It has been a blast. Thank you all.